Imagine a man so convinced of his own vision that he pushed away everyone who tried to help him. His business partner feared him. His employees walked out. His board of directors turned against him. The company he founded, a company that was supposed to make him a billionaire, literally fired him and told him to go home. It was supposed to be the end of the story. A man who thought he was a genius, proven to be just another failed entrepreneur with delusions of grandeur. The tech world had already moved on, already decided who the winners would be. And this man, this fired, rejected, humiliated man, was not one of them. Then something impossible happened. The companies that rejected him went bankrupt. The industry that laughed at him rebuilt itself in his image. And the man they said would fail became the most influential businessman of his generation. His name was Steve Jobs. And to understand why everyone was so sure he'd fail, you have to start with a part of the story nobody wants to tell. He was adopted, born in 1955, given up by his mother and father, and taken in by a couple in Los Altos, California. His adoptive parents were good people, but they weren't wealthy. His father was a machinist. His mother was an accountant. This was not Silicon Valley money. This was working-class California, before Silicon Valley even had a name. He grew up curious and strange. He cared nothing for school, nothing for authority, nothing for the things his peers thought mattered. He built things. He took radios apart. He read electronics manuals for fun. At 13, he cold-called the Hewlett-Packard CEO to ask for help with the project. Bill Hewlett gave him parts. By every normal measure, Steve Jobs was brilliant. But here's the thing, brilliant children are a dime a dozen. Brilliant children with zero respect for rules, those ones scare people. And Steve Jobs scared people from the beginning. At 17, he dropped out of high school. At 18, he dropped out of college after 6 months. He looked people in the eye and tell them they were wrong, even when they were his superiors. He had long hair when the valley was short. He wore bare feet in offices. He'd sit in meetings and openly mock people's ideas. And most crucially, he had no credentials, no degree, no family money, no connections except the ones he made himself. And he made them by being relentlessly, aggressively certain that everyone else was wrong and he was right. So when he and his friend Steve Wozniak built the first Apple computer in a garage in 1976, nobody expected it to matter. A couple of kids, no education, no capital, no credibility, building a circuit board in a garage. The established computer companies, the real companies with real engineers and real business sense, barely noticed. But they built something that worked. And then they built something better. And then Apple computer companies started to grow. This is where the story takes a turn that everyone focuses on, and where almost everyone misses a real lesson. By the late 70s, Apple was successful. Jobs was a multimillionaire before he was 25 years old. He had money, he had power, and he had confirmation of what he'd always believed. He was right, and everyone else was wrong. And then he made a decision that seemed to confirm his genius. He decided Apple needed a professional manager, a real CEO, someone experienced, credible, with a track record of building real companies. He went out and he recruited John Sculley, a legendary businessman who'd run Pepsi-Cola, who understood markets and operations and how real business worked. Jobs brought Sculley into Apple to be the experienced voice, the corrective ballast against his own impulsiveness. But then something changed. The company started to need a corrective ballast more than it needed a visionary. Apple's early success had built a board of directors with serious money and serious opinions. They looked at Sculley's experience. They looked at Jobs' youth and his casual disrespect for authority. And they started to listen to Sculley more than they listened to Jobs. The conflict grew slowly at first. Jobs wanted to push the technology further. The board wanted stable profits. Jobs wanted to take risks. The board wanted to play it safe. Sculley had been brought in to balance Jobs out, and increasingly that meant restraining him. And then, in 1985, the board made their decision. Jobs had to go. They told him he was too young, too inexperienced, too destructive. They said a real company needed real leadership. They voted him out. His own board fired him from the company he created. It was supposed to be the moment where Steve Jobs got humbled, where he learned that you can't just be a visionary. Sometimes you have to know when to step back. Sometimes you need people wiser than you telling you no. But Jobs didn't learn that lesson. He did the opposite. The day he was fired, he could have taken the billions he'd made from Apple stock, retired to a beach somewhere, and lived out his life as a successful entrepreneur. Instead, he did something that seemed insane. He started over. He immediately founded a new company called Next Computer, and he made the exact same bet he'd made the first time. that he understood something about the future that nobody else did, that everyone else was wrong, and that he was willing to be humiliated to prove it. Next computer was a disaster. It was expensive. It was ahead of its time. The market didn't want it. Customers didn't buy it. The experts said Jobs had proven exactly what the Apple board had suspected, that without experienced business people to rein him in, he was just a visionary with no sense of commercial reality. But here's where it gets interesting. While Next was failing, Jobs bought another company called Pixar. It was a computer graphics division that George Lucas was trying to get rid of. Nobody else wanted it. Jobs bought it for $10 million, a fortune to invest in what everybody knew was a dead end. Pixar at that time was a technology company. It made hardware. Nobody was interested. By every measure, it was a terrible investment. A failed visionary throwing more money at another doomed idea. Except one person at Pixar, Ed Catmull, believed in a different vision. He believed that eventually computers would be powerful enough to make movies. Not just help make movies. Make them entirely. That was crazy. That was the kind of thing you'd get laughed out of a room for suggesting. Jobs believed it anyway. He kept funding Pixar, while it lost money for year after year. He was bleeding cash. He was being mocked. The tech industry had moved on from Steve Jobs. He was yesterday's news. And then Pixar made a short film called Toy Story, and it became the highest-grossing animated film ever made. And suddenly, the company nobody wanted was the most valuable entertainment technology company in the world. The man everyone said had no business sense had created another industry-changing success, while everyone else said it was impossible. Now, here's where you have to make a choice about what you're looking at. Because the easy version of this story is that Steve Jobs was a visionary who everyone doubted, and he succeeded anyway. The feel-good version. The underdog story. But look closer, and you see something more complicated. Jobs was difficult. Genuinely difficult. He made products that nobody asked for, products that seemed wasteful and overpriced. He fired people who disagreed with him. He screamed at employees. He demanded perfection in things that didn't seem to matter. He was, by most accounts, kind of a jerk. The board that fired him wasn't made up of stupid people. They were serious business people who looked at his behavior and decided that, genius or not, you couldn't run a company like that. You needed rules. You needed hierarchy. You needed people to respect authority. They weren't wrong about that. But, and here's the thing that changes everything, they were wrong about what the future would look like. The future didn't need what they thought it needed. The future needed exactly what Jobs was doing. Pushing, questioning, refusing to accept that something was impossible just because everyone said so. The very things that seem like flaws to the experienced business people turn out to be the exact traits required to invent the future. So was Steve Jobs a visionary genius? Yes. Was he also an arrogant, difficult, occasionally cruel man who pushed people around and demanded things nobody thought were necessary? Also yes. The reason he succeeded wasn't because he was right about everything. It was because he was willing to be wrong, publicly, repeatedly, catastrophically wrong, and keep going anyway. He got fired. He started over. He burned through tens of millions of dollars on a company that failed. He invested in technology that everyone said was a dead end. And he did all of this not despite being told he'd fail, but because of it. The people who fired him from Apple were trying to teach him a lesson about humility. They wanted to show him that the world doesn't revolve around his vision, that expertise matters, that you can't just push people around and expect to succeed. They succeeded at teaching him that lesson. And the lesson he learned was, they're right, I need to be humble about what I know, but I'm still right about what the future looks like. And he was willing to be humiliated to prove it. Most people, when they get fired from the company they founded, learn a different lesson. They learn that they're not as special as they thought. They learn that other people's experience matters more than their instincts. They learn to respect authority. Steve Jobs learned the opposite. He learned that he could be fired, rejected, mocked, and if he was willing to keep moving, keep pushing, keep believing in what everyone said was impossible, eventually the world would catch up. The comparison that nobody makes is to Timothy Dexter, a man from hundreds of years earlier who everyone thought was an idiot, but who kept making bets that seemed obviously stupid and kept winning anyway. Different era, different stakes, different industry, but the same pattern. Jobs would later say that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. And that's the easy reading of it, the inspirational reading. But the harder reading is this. He meant it, not in a grateful, humble way, but in an honest way. Getting fired validated his belief that everyone else was wrong about what mattered. The board thought a real company needed real leadership. Jobs thought a real company needed someone willing to seem like an idiot in pursuit of something true. And by the time the world caught up to what he was doing, it was too late. The pattern had already been established. The future would look the way Steve Jobs thought it should look, not the way the board of experienced business people thought it should look. So which was he, a visionary or a delusional ego case? And the honest answer is, he was both. And the reason he won isn't because his vision was pure or his instincts were infallible. It's because he was willing to do the thing everybody knew was stupid. Because everybody knew you couldn't make an animated film entirely by computer. Everybody knew a company couldn't succeed without a professional manager. Everybody knew that vision without experience was just fantasy. Everybody except the one man who actually tried. And when you look at the pattern, Apple to next to Pixar to the iPhone, it becomes clear that this wasn't luck. It was a man so certain that everyone else was wrong that he was willing to bet everything on it, again and again and again. Maybe he was a genius. Maybe he was delusional. Maybe the reason he kept winning is that the world of business, like the world of Timothy Dexter, rewards the person willing to do what cannot be done. Not because it will work, but because they're the only ones crazy enough to try.